Creating Immersive Experiences with ESIE and Archipelago is sponsored by PLS and co-sponsored by SMART. The speakers include Reed Jones from the University of Buffalo, Allison Lund from the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, and Chris Holzman from Hilbert College. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much for having us today. Today we're going to start off with a little bit of a history of this project that's been going on for close to 3 years. The project is called Empire State Immersive Experiences. We refer to it as ESIE. The first thing that I do need to mention is that this project would not be possible without the support of the Western New York Library Resources Council, as this has been a 3-year ongoing project, and we are now currently in beta phase. So what I want to do today, before I hand it over to my co-presenters, is just discuss a little bit of the genesis of this project and some of the inspiration that went behind putting this together. And I also want to discuss some of the early issues that were faced by the members of this task force. But early on, as we began to think about this in a more of a kind of a historical perspective, we look at this through a preservation lens and also an educational lens. So for example, if you go back to 1901, obviously there was no technology there to properly get great footage or photographs of any of the buildings that were built for the World's Fair. Of course, none of these buildings exist today, with the exception of the Buffalo History Museum. Moving on, for those of you who may be sports fans, there are great old sports buildings, one of them being here out in the western side of the state, Buffalo Memorial Auditorium, host to the Buffalo Sabres until 1996. There was not a whole lot of photography done for the Memorial Auditorium. There was a few projects of just taking some pictures right before the building was demolished, but we had thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to revisit some of these historical buildings? And then currently there are some projects to revitalize certain other architectural places here in Buffalo, one of them being the Larkin building. And this is a project by a Spanish technology company called Isostopy. And this was created by an architect named David Romero. And you can see here the video of a virtual reality screen here that you're seeing the actual inside of the Larkin building that was demolished in 1950 here in Buffalo. And it's also complete with hotspots where you can add in actual photographs of the building and kind of compare and contrast with what was photographed and what was taken. And through these lenses is kind of where we wanted to move forward with this project and try to create a product that would sustain some of the architectural or historical events that are happening now. You also have been seeing over the course of probably the last few years, you're seeing a lot of these ghost imageries of old buildings superimposed on photographs of current places. So this is a example from Genesee Street here in Buffalo, New York, from a website called Buffalo Rising. So the very beginning in 2017, in the Resources Sharing Committee, two librarians at SUNY Buffalo State had pitched the idea of creating a searchable digital repository of 360 images housed under Creative Commons license. And the idea once again here is preservation of historical buildings and events, and also to create academic content that can be shared, that can be edited and used for any type of classroom purpose. The founders really of this project were Ken Fujiuchi, the emerging technologies librarian from SUNY Buffalo State, and Joseph Riggi, the head of information services also at SUNY Buffalo State. Their idea came from this site here, that's Penellum.org. And what Penellum is, it's an open source lightweight viewer for 360 images. And if I can maybe just jump out into a browser for just 1 second, I'm going to do that. And you are seeing the browser here. So this is a 360 image of the George Peabody Library, and very similar to what we saw with the Larkin building, we have hotspots throughout the 360 image, and there is also a nice, there's one hotspot there, looking at certain areas of it. And then the other nice instance of this is that you can move into different areas by essentially combining two images, 360 images together. And when you click on the arrow, you can move into a different room, creating kind of a virtual tour. So after going through this website, both Ken and Joe had the idea of creating a task force that would be housed within the Resources Sharing Committee for the Western New York Library Resources Council. The first order of business was to figure out how we were going to capture the 360 images. The camera that was selected is the Ricoh Theta 5 360 camera. It was selected for a number of different reasons, one of which is the ease of use, and you can see some of the specifications here. It does hold, has a pretty significant amount of memory for holding images. It does come with it is connected to an application that can be downloaded onto a mobile device or a phone too. So this was one of the reasons why we selected it. Of course, also price was a big factor in that. And after we had built this, or after we had chosen the camera, the next idea was to create a camera kit that could be loaned out to WNYLRC member libraries. And of course, we had to come together with, what the kit would look like, and we had to troubleshoot some of the issues that would come with lending out a kit. For example, we needed to make sure that people actually had access to the applications. So not assuming that everybody had a smartphone on them that wanted to use this, we decided that we might add an iPad and create tutorial videos for best practices and legal guidelines, and of course instructions for upload into the repository when the repository was created. Of course, this was an idea that was put together before the pandemic, and a lot has changed, of course, since the pandemic, but these were some of the early workflows of the project. And the rental essentially would be given to libraries for a period of time, and those libraries could use the camera for both internal use and, of course, with the agreement that they would upload a selection of the images to the repository, where other members and other users could ideally use it for educational purposes or just for personal purposes, and take those images and edit them to create some of their own educational content. Some of the ideas that we had for marketing this would have been, there was a small private school that is a WNYLRC member that has a forensic science program, and they have some CSI labs there. So we had thought that they might want to use the 360 camera to photograph their CSI labs, and then they could use those images for educational material. They could use it for marketing on their website or tours on the campus. And then, of course, and the agreement would say that they would also allow us to have some of those images for the repository. After a few months of talking about this, we decided that this was best this would be best served to have its own task force. So we did create an augmented reality / virtual reality task force through the Western New York Library Resources Council. We thought that the Resources Sharing Committee wasn't going to be able to spend all of the time on this. So this was really a list of people that are currently serving on this project, as we are in beta phase now. And there's obviously, once again, there's a special thanks to the Western New York Library Resources Council for sponsoring this program. So the task force, the first goals was we had to explore the potential of using the Penellum viewer within a greater repository. We also had to clarify legal issues and concerns. So people going out with 360 cameras out into public spaces, this could cause for some issues. We had to create the camera kit for loan, and we had to also provide documentation for best practices. Allison will talk a little bit about exploring the metadata options that we had and really try to evolve the vision of the website. I think I skipped one there. So the early problems that we came across, and one of the real barriers that we had to deal with, was development. We had to figure out whether we were able to, whether we had the expertise within the group to create the repository, or the second choice was to look into hiring another company for the development purpose, which comes with obviously some cost issues. The other problem was with the kit and developing operating procedures. How are we going to loan? And then, of course, user workflows. So we would have at least users who would be able to upload some of the images, and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to get out of control, that there wasn't going to be thousands of images put up there that didn't need to be. And we wanted to make sure that there was a proper amount of metadata and the proper metadata being entered in for each of the items, which also brought us to the issue of administrative workflows. So obviously somebody is going to have to be overseeing this. So we needed to create a good balance between having the user take on the responsibility of uploading and putting in a certain amount of metadata, but also not having the user getting overwhelmed with librarian type tasks. But we also needed to balance that with how much time we were going to be able to spend looking over the website. And then finally, I'm going to end with some of the legal considerations that we had to deal with. First off, obviously privacy being one of them. We were told that we had to avoid public restrooms, children, anybody in law enforcement. Of course, those of you who've gone through Google Earth, we would have to look into potential facial blurring for public places, and if anybody's private property could be photographed accidentally in the background. We also thought about taking images from proprietary establishments like Mumford. Mumford is a museum in Genesee Country Village, and they are a proprietary establishment, so how much of the grounds would they allow us to photograph and give away? The other issue that we came across was some commercial entities. There was a performance theater interested in using the camera for taking images of where their seats were. So potential customers could come in and look and see where their seat would be and what the view would be from their seat, which brought us into another issue of copyright restrictions. If we did a Creative Commons that didn't allow for commercial use, then we wouldn't be able to allow some of the commercial entities that we wanted to get images from use it for their commercial purposes, which is why we ended up at the CC BY. At this point, I'm going to hand this over to Reed, who's going to go into a little more depth about the creation of the group and how the workflows were presented to put the website together.
All right. So thank you, Chris, for setting me up so nicely. Yeah, so after we had kind of gotten the idea of what the group wanted to do, had the physical kit ready, and we're trying to develop a platform, we kind of went into this phase of intense project management and development over 3 years. And I kind of want to touch on the success and what we learned from this entire process in focusing specifically on how we built the platform for a front-end facing repository with back-end options to curate. So early on in the process, we had the idea to create this platform, and over the 3 years, we've kind of built core goals that we wanted this platform to achieve. First, we wanted to make sure that all of the entities, the images, text and audio were able to be shared through Creative Commons licensing CC BY 4.0. This was a rather large discussion about how we could best give access to these images without creating any unnecessary barriers. One of the major conversations was about adding the non-commercial aspect to the Creative Commons licensing. This was actually touched on a little bit by Chris, but we decided to remove that as a barrier because we wanted commercial entities to still be able to reuse these images for their purposes, especially a theater like Shays being able to repurpose their images for their own usage without potentially running into legal issues. Secondly, we really wanted to leverage the virtual reality experience to create these tours, much like a museum or art gallery would be able to do. In person, you could now stitch similar images together, have this almost seamless transition from place to place, and be able to experience something in a way that you were not able to otherwise. Building off of this, we were hoping to add a layer on top of the images known as hotspots, where you could add text or audio to an image to give more curation to that image and maybe contextualize it to a specific idea or a specific research purpose. And not only that, use these hotspots as points to move from one image to the next and keep that context consistent. Building into that, with the tour building, you wanted to have different instances of the same images. So you could have an image with certain hotspots saved somewhere, and then someone else could come in, take that same image and put different context to it. Therefore allowing for a lot more educational reuse. In order to get people to contribute these images, we wanted to make sure that the ingest on the user providing the images was as easy as possible by allowing the user to contribute with as limited of data and contextualization as possible. So making it more of a user placing in an initial image and then curation happening after. The curation layer was necessary because we wanted not only to be able to re-look at images and get the correct metadata and correct contextualization for them, we also wanted to make sure that we were limiting the ingest of images that would not be necessarily appropriate for this repository. So if someone was able to ingest an image, but it didn't really fit the goals of our repository and wasn't really applicable for educational purposes, we could vet it ahead of time because it would come in as a draft and it would have to be curated to become published. Finally, we wanted to have a user interface with the built-in Penellum viewer that would be able to experience images, 360 images, and be able to interact with them on a variety of different devices, be it a computer, your phone, or a dedicated VR headset. So because we had solidified our goals, I want to take a step to kind of show you how we got to these goals and what we ended up doing to make them happen by kind of going through our process of how we tried to build this repository and had some hiccups along the way. So there's three real phases to this project, at least from the repository building standpoint. At first, when we had the kit and we were first creating this group, we had some technical expertise enough to build a general repository and have 360 images stored in it. So we were able to do some in-house testing using research and trying to play around with Content DM and some Fedora home-built solutions. This is a really crucial phase for us because we were able to learn basically what specifically we wanted, what we needed to have work for this to become a real project and a real archive. We realized the difficulties of getting things to connect to each other and where the technical expertise was needed in areas that we just could not fill. But it did give us a proof of concept because we were able to get 360 images in and we were able to look at them in some way. One of the biggest problems that we had at this phase is we were really reliant on people's goodwill to dedicate time to this. And even so, if they could dedicate a lot of time, there were only one or two people who had the technical expertise to actually work on the project. So it became very person dependent. And it felt like the team could not support these people in the way that they really needed to. Moving from there, we looked to more commercial options, and we found a couple of groups that were willing to listen to our idea and try and draft up what they thought would be a good solution for us. This is a really great phase for our project development because it introduced us to these very concise project-oriented meetings where we had specific project managers asking for our input on specific things, trying to figure out exactly what we wanted and building solutions for us. The problems that we kind of had at this phase were really about the fact that there was a disconnect between the library world and the developer world. A lot of the time when we were having these meetings, our input, while it was noted, was not really understood. The idea of this repository was kind of foreign to a couple of the companies that we talked to, and they were more looking to find a product that they already had created and make it work with what we were doing, instead of really taking our interests into play and building something that was specifically designed for this. Not only did we have those issues, we really had a major issue with cost, because the solutions that we were presented to us were just much more expensive than we could deal with. So after that, we had pulled away from some of the commercial contracts. We ended up through a fair amount of collaboration between Cheryl Knabb, who is the chair of the WNYLRC Council, and Metro, found out that they had been working on their own content management system and some development stuff known as Archipelago, and there might be a way that we could work together to make ESIE a reality. This truly was one of the luckiest finds, I guess you could say. It was a really nice fit, where we, from the first meeting, kind of all got together, had the understanding of the value this had to librarianship, especially because much of the VR and AR landscape is owned up by companies like Amazon and Facebook. So having a place for the librarians to have a repository and about that it caters to VR and AR was crucial. Not only that, I mean, it was extremely lucky. WNYLRC is mainly hosted using Drupal websites, and Metro was very proficient in using Drupal to create front ends. In our initial meetings, we could tell that the engagement and the responsiveness was very high. We were able to have very fruitful discussions from the beginning and consistently keep building off of those. And from seeing the Archipelago backend, it was a CMS that looked familiar to librarians and was pretty easy to get into. So once we had those meetings, we got to the point where we could draft a contract and really get working. And this was one of the most exciting parts of the project. And I kind of wanted to touch on kind of where we got from once we signed the contract to getting to beta phase and what made that successful. So all of our experience going up to signing the contract with Metro really helped us in developing a very concise contract that worked with Metro, where we could have specific deliverables that we were looking for and they were willing to build, and having the expectation of contribution from both the task force and the development team in all of these aspects. And not only that, we were able to ensure that the ESIE site would be hosted by Metro, and that there would be specific training for the task force to get more experience with Archipelago and have more input. This was crucial to our working agreement and really kind of set the grounds for success. And it only worked because we had, for roughly a year, been trying to build this on our own and find other solutions. So by the time we got to the negotiating table, we knew exactly what we want. We had defined all of the goals that I set forth in the beginning of my slides. So adding on to that, I mean, once the contract was there, we were able to have consistent meetings. We had seen how project management worked. We knew exactly what the task force was able to contribute. So we'd have actionable items that would be checked off before the meetings. They'd be done. We'd have the meeting. we'd create more action items, and we'd go forward from there. So it was a process of constant building and constant creation of this and figuring out things. And included in that, I mean, the way that we used collaborative working documents really was helpful because we had real-time access to when things were getting worked on and what issues were arising. So we could have this almost constant stream of attempt, test, success or fail, and then reattempt until we get a success and reworking. So by the time we got to the meetings, these questions that could take up the entirety of the meeting could now be discussed at much smaller increments so that we can move on to the next thing. Included in that, we were able to get pretty extensive training starting right about the beginning of the year and going through the summer, where we really got immersed into the back end of Archipelago. This was an incredible tool for us and for the development team. For us, we were learning the ins and outs of the system, but for the development team, they were training us to actually understand what was and wasn't really feasible or a good idea in changing things on the front end. So we had a lot more knowledge about what we could and couldn't do. And when we were doing our UI testing and user testing on the front end and then the back end, it was much easier to see where things could be fixed and tweaked and where they couldn't. And finally, one of the things that really helped us is once we had a contract, we were able to be more motivated to add content to the repository to test out these things. So we get firsthand experience with what the users would do, what the curators would do, what the administrators would deal with at every single phase. And that's been giving us an ability with a small group to get larger scale usability testing than you would otherwise. I mean, the combination of just having the training and going through the process of doing it has really helped us kind of try and figure out things that we can better on a constant basis. So I think the takeaways mainly from this project is that even when it feels like you're not going forward, there's a lot you can take away from it. And one of the main things that has been fostering the success is the engagement and the collaborative nature that you can have between those who are developing the site and those who are envisioning and trying to make the site like an actuality. So at this point, I think now that you've kind of understood how we got to the point that we created a repository, I'm going to shift the slides over to Allison to talk a little bit more about what decisions we actually made and how we deal with the back end and the metadata.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Allison Lund, Digital Projects and Metadata Librarian for the Metropolitan New York Library Council. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you about the metadata workflows and repository system selection for ESIE and how we ended up in Archipelago. I'll also touch briefly on some key points in our metadata decision-making process, and I will just briefly review Archipelago and the open source repository system being developed and supported by Metro. More information on Archipelago, including links and contact information, will be shared throughout the presentation. So far today, you've heard Chris and Reed discuss ESIE's origins, how the project formed, and also what the big picture motivations and goals are for the site. I'm going to move back to the point in the project development process where we were about to embark on those metadata and system decisions. We had mapped out the details that most heavily inform those decisions, the content and the users. We had defined the primary content type would be sharing in ESIE as panorama or 360-degree images and tours, also enrichment or hotspot content such as photos, documents, or audio. We had also identified our primary user categories for backend or system interactions, aside from general users, the wider public who will be interacting with the site. we settled on 3 broad categories of internal users who will be working within the site behind the scenes. We of course recognize that there can be overlap among all of these users. And just a little bit further on that, we defined the 3 primary internal user types as contributors, curators, and administrators. And these roles and their expected responsibilities, we should say, came out of a lot of those meetings that Reed was discussing. So contributors are individuals who will share panoramas in ESIE, such as students. Curators are individuals who will share panoramas, but will additionally create tours and add hotspot content, so professors and library professionals. Administrators are the pros who do it all, so that would be us, the ESIE project team members. Okay, so with our primary content and user types defined, we had to ask ourselves important metadata questions, following along with the notion that metadata provides the context for resources, which makes them useful. We started with the big question: what contextual information needs to be provided to make ESIE content useful? For general users, so they can find and interact with panoramas and other materials in the repository. For contributors and curators, so they can share their panoramas and provide helpful descriptive information. For administrators, so they can review, edit, and manage the content. And for machines, so the content displays properly and is searchable and navigable within and without the system. We also asked ourselves what metadata we could reasonably expect to use internal users to provide, and also what metadata the system we ultimately selected should and could manage. Okay, so at this point, before moving any further with our own projects, metadata, and system decisions, we took time to survey the field and see what we could learn from others and potentially apply to ESIE. We identified existing GLAM and commercial projects, such as the ones demonstrated by Chris earlier. We also examined repositories and websites with panorama content, that we could come across. We reviewed what kind of information or metadata were commonly present alongside the panorama content, and we also reviewed any best practices, guidelines, or documentation we encountered along the way. What we found were that commercial sites such as YouTube or Facebook, where people are sharing 360 images or videos just kind of for, entertainment use, and also on real estate sites where people are providing access to virtual tours for different property walkthroughs, that kind of thing. We found that these sites tended to have minimal descriptive information for the content, and there's no real surprises there. It's kind of the nature of things. For GLAM sites that we encountered, we found that they tended to be limited in scope and mostly related to particular locations or singular events, such as exhibit space or building tours. Within the wider GLAM community, for larger scale projects and developments, we found that the focus at this point is primarily on 3D models and content. So that would be things like, a 3D model of a skeleton or something like that. More of like that kind of focus. Some examples that we found, if you're interested in doing some nice reading, the Smithsonian 3D metadata model, and also the ongoing work being done by the 3D content in Europeana task force. Lastly, we also noticed that the content in both commercial and GLAM sites tends to provide access or tends to rely heavily on proprietary software and system requirements. Looking forward, there will likely be additional open source software development and deployment, but in the current moment, many VR, AR applications do rely on those proprietary platforms. That's just something to keep in mind. We of course do not want that kind of influence in our project. We want ESIE to be as open and accessible as possible, so kind of trying to keep that in mind as we move forward. The big takeaways from our research were that there is not yet a widely adopted metadata standard or data model for panorama, even 3D or AR, VR content for GLAM or commercial applications. Standards are in the works and will emerge for this type of content in the future, but at this point, we feel that EASIE panorama content can be effectively served using just existing metadata best practices for traditional media, such as photographs and videos. We just need to take into account the 360-degree nature of the content captured in the panorama. And we also need to educate our potential content contributors to think about this aspect when they're describing their panoramas and assigning metadata. Related to this, enrichment or hotspot content, those documents, audio, video, can also be effectively served using existing metadata best practices. So our overall approach to the metadata, we just need to describe our resources well now, educate our contributors to how to describe things well, and we also need to prepare for expected changes and advancements in VR, AR technologies. So this is going over a little bit of what Reed had mentioned earlier, but after our research process and many project group meetings and plenty of coffee and baked goods, Cheryl Knabb, again, the director of the Western New York Library Resources Council, she arranged a meeting with Nate Hill and Diego Pino Navarro at Metro. Nate is the director of the Metropolitan New York Library Council, and Diego is the lead architect for Archipelago and Metro's assistant director for digital strategy. So we described EASIE to them. We shared our ingredients list, and they walked us through a demo Archipelago instance they had cooked up. EASIE, we finally found our repository home, and we got started building the site together. So what is Archipelago and what can it do? I'll get into a quick overview in just a moment, and Reed's going to demonstrate the EASIE site for you, so you can see a little more. But I just wanted to mention now that a fuller explanation can be found in Diego's Archipelago 101 presentation shared here, and that link in the bottom left side of the screen that begins with slides at. The other two links in the center of the slide will take you to additional Archipelago resources. Continuing on, this is a slide taken directly from Diego's presentation that was just mentioned. It describes Archipelago in a nutshell. I'm not going to go through all of these points right now, but just so you're aware of the kind of information that might be or that is found in Diego's presentation. So Archipelago is an open source repository system built on top of Drupal. It leverages Drupal's core content management system components and custom Archipelago components, such as the Strawberry Field modules, to form a flexible and extensible digital repository system. All data, including metadata for digital objects, is stored in JSON and can be cast into different metadata displays depending on project or collection needs. That worked out great for EASIE because of what we found when we were looking for metadata standards and data models for this kind of content. So it has that built-in flexibility that we were really needing. Other Archipelago features that particularly stand out from a metadata crafting perspective include schema, data model flexibility, accessible administrative actions that enable quick workflow adjustments, such as through web form customizations, which we went into quite a bit for this project, and also display adjustments through Twig template edits. I have a link to Twig on the next slide for clarification if for something that you might not be familiar with. Archipelago also features linked data integration for all of the heavy hitter vocabulary, such as Wikidata, linked open data, or Library of Congress linked data, and Getty. And Archipelago is equipped with the tools we needed to display content in a wide variety of formats using many viewers, in particular panoramas and 3D content. The system also makes use of IIIF manifest for efficient media and file preservation, presentation and access, so no derivative storage is needed, which is great for an potentially media and image heavy repository. Okay, so regarding the Archipelago deployment for EASIE, the open source Penellum viewer that Chris had mentioned earlier was integrated into Archipelago to display the panorama content. Diego also built out tour building capabilities for the creation of panorama tours. Metro worked with the EASIE project team to develop and implement tailored web forms for uploading content, all dependent on that user role an individual is assigned for their account. We'll demonstrate some of the upload process pieces in just a moment, but essentially the metadata being asked for and the capabilities available to users scale up with their user role, as is typical in many systems. The EASIE site also features custom theming and various other customizations, such as those twig template edits for metadata display. Also features some search functionality adjustments, just to name a few of the things that were developed. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to Reed for a walkthrough of the EASIE site, but before that, just a couple quick notes. First, I want to mention that the EASIE site is just a singular Archipelago instance and that there is additional functionality in particular related to different digital object ingest and upload processes, and you'll not see that today, of course. But if you have any questions about Archipelago, want to learn more about the system's capabilities, or follow along with the Archipelago community, you can get started using these various platforms and contexts. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Reed.
All right. All right. Yeah, so before we get into the demo, I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple of different things that I don't really have time to show, but are kind of interesting about the site. So we've talked a little bit about the roles that you can have on the EASIE site. And so when you go through the sign up, currently to get an account, you have to be a WNYLRC associated with a WNYLRC member institution. It requires your name, email, username, and institution, and it defaults to a contributor role. But these are not required to interact with the site. You can still download images yourself. You just can't contribute images that you've captured or really edit other crucial images. The benefit of having a sign up to is not only can you contribute to the site, but you can now have a section where you can look at anything that you've created yourself. So if you have a contributor role, it won't immediately publish to the general site what you've contributed. But if you have a sign in, you can go in and see exactly what you've put in. Even though it's in draft state, you have access to it and you can interact with it. And the second thing I wanted to touch on is currently in the beta, we are working on optimizing the search functionality. Right now, there's a tokenized search bar, so you can put in terms and it'll try and bring back any images that have that in there, have those terms in there, and it's been pretty effective. And also we have 3 pre-built like search buttons. They're kind of just filters. So you can search by media. Currently the 3 options right now are panorama, a tour, or a photograph. You can search by places, and within the site itself, we use OpenStreetMaps to designate the location of images, and it takes the city field from that and uses that to find the places. And you can also search by subjects, which currently defaults to the first Wikidata entry for each item. So I can kind of explain that a little bit more once we see the site. So let's go check it out. All right. All right, so this is the EASIE site, and ignore this bottom part. This is the administrative aspect of it, but I'm currently logged in. And what we're going to do, and bear with me for a second because I'm going to just switch to a slide and show you what we're going to do. So I've got 2 tasks that we can try and accomplish and go through. First, I want to look at a panorama and edit some of the information in it. And then second, I'm going to take 3 separate images of Petra and try and craft a tour and just go through kind of the process of that. So let me bring back over the site. And now that I'm logged in, I can go in and I'm going to just go to content and look at my content first. And this is what I was talking about. So these are currently published, but see, there's one unpublished, but I can still have access to all of them. So I'm going to go and edit this monastery image. And we're going to go, we can view it first, and it was defaulted into edit. But as you can see, this Penellum viewer, much like the example that Chris showed at the beginning of this, you can interact with the image, move it around as much as you want. And this is the monastery at the top of the main hike in Petra in Jordan. I captured this in November of last year while I was out visiting my sister, and it was the second time I've been there and equally as astonishing as when I was there the first time. So let's go back to edit. All right, so I'm going to edit in default and edit the descriptive metadata so I can show you as a contributor what you're going to really be adding. So when you're a contributor and you're first ingesting an image, these are the fields that you're going to see. So you're going to start off, you have to give it a title, you have to designate the media type, and then upload the file. You're going to have to give a description, and then you can use OpenStreetMaps. So say I didn't have anything here and I knew it was in Petra. I can search in OpenStreetMaps, and then you'll get a couple of different options. And I picked the one that was the closest. And then it pops up there. And then you can see the associated metadata that is brought in based off of that selection. And this is that city field that is used to search for location. We can see that this is input incorrectly. So we want to have last name and then first name, comma first name. So I can change that. And then institutional owner, not required. Local identifier is also not required. And the original date is the date the image was taken, not the date it was uploaded. And then there's a terms of service, which explains to you the licensing. And then you're accepting that. And then there's a link to more Creative Commons license information. And then we're going to move on to the next step. And now this is where you can enter Wikidata and Getty terms. So for Wikidata, we're going to type in Petra, and then you can see, much like the OpenStreetMaps, you get a couple of options. So we're going to do the city in southern Jordan, and we're going to, for a Getty image, we're going to do tourism centers, tourist centers. So it'll find the closest Getty term, and then you can add those. Those are both required. They help with the searching and classifying. If you go down, we also have the ability to put in agents and roles. So if this was, say, the Larkin building, we could put in Frank Lloyd Wright as the agent and the role as architect. So you can attribute those to the image as well. And then we'll move on to the next step. All right. So collection membership, this is something that we haven't really built on yet because we're in beta and we don't have a firm grasp because we don't have enough in the repository to start creating collections. So where you can skip that and we can finish the description. And now we can preview it if we'd like. And now this image is showing up. It doesn't give you the full OpenStreetMaps and Getty and Wikidata at this point, but it just shows you the description, kind of what's going on, and then the image itself to make sure it's actually coming in correctly. And then I'll go back. And we'll change that to published, and we'll save it. You get a confirmation. And now you can see it's got the Wikidata subjects, the Getty terms, and the creator is now corrected. So now that we have this image in there, I want to take the 3 images I have of Petra and turn it into a panorama. So instead of creating a panorama, we're going to create a panorama tour. And I will show you how we go through this. So I'm going to just say Petra test, and we'll keep it as a draft, and we'll start selecting scenes. So you can do a quick search of terms, and you can see if any of them come together. So I want to do this in the order of the hike. So I'm going to start with the Petra treasury because I did the hike and I kind of know the flow of how it goes. So I'm going to select this scene. And then as you see, the image comes up. So now maybe I want to add something. So let's see, I click on here. This is where I want to add a piece of information. So there's different types of hotspots that we can do. So you can add a link, a digital object, or a panorama scene. So I just want to add some text here. So what I'll do is add text, and I'll just say this is the Treasury building. All right, so I've got the Treasury building typed in as the title, and then I'll click on the area I want it, and then I'll add hotspot. And now you can see this info came up, and it just, when you hover over it, it says the Treasury building. Okay, so now we have our first hotspot. Now let's add another scene. So we'll do Petra again. All right, the next thing on the hike is the theater. So I want the theater to be the next thing, and I'll select that. So I want people to notice a couple of things about this. We can see the theater. I'm going to add a couple of hotspots. So I know that these little nooks right here are actually tombs because when I was there, I was able to see them. So I just wanted to add a hotspot right over one of them that adds that. So these are tombs. So now everybody knows that. And the other thing I know is the name of this mountain. So I'm gonna go and add that into there. So now we can have a little bit of information. So these are tombs, and this is the Indahar, and now we have a little more context to it. So I also want to put a different type of hotspot. So I want this to link to the other scene that I just did. So I'm going to do that. And when you put another panorama scene hotspot, it'll tell you the images that you can link to. So we're already on the theater. So we want to go back to here. And I know it's back on this left side of the image is where you go to the treasury. So I'm going to add that hotspot and then say in the title, back to the treasury, and add that hotspot. And as you can see, when you do that, it should link to the treasury itself. And we'll test that once we finish the panorama. So finally, I've got to add one more scene. And then I'll link everything together. So we've got the monastery. We're going to select that. And then for this one, I'm not going to add any more text hotspots. I'm just going to link it back to the theater and put that there, back to the theater. Add hotspot. All right, and then we're going to go back to the theater. And now we can link this to the monastery, which if you go this way on the hike, that's how you go. And we'll do, and select the monastery, add the hotspot. And then the only other link we have to do is link the treasury to the theater. So we're going to do this, click here. And add the hotspot. All right. And then once we're done, we're going to move on to the next step, and we'll add metadata. So this is going to be a panorama tour description, a brief tour of Petra in Jordan. And this can be much more involved. Currently, I'm just doing this to save time. Date created, so that was back in 2019. I did that in November, and we'll say it was the 11th. So Wikidata, I'm going to use the same Wikidata terms I used on the images, Petra as a disambiguation. And we're going to say tourism center. And it should say it's a tourist centers. Tourist centers. All right, we're going to ignore the Library of Congress label. That can always be added after the fact, but it's not required. There's no agent or role associated with this. And then we're going to move on to the next step. We're going to ignore the collections. You can attach a file to the, like an image to display before you start the tour. Currently, I'm going to ignore this and save the metadata. And now we're going to save it as a draft. And when we click on this, now everything's come together. We now can move between different images. And we can always go back and add more information. But this is basically the workflow we envisioned, and it's been exciting to see this happen and be realized on this site. So at this point, I will get out of the demo and just briefly touch on a couple of things that we're trying to look at going forward. So one of the things that happened recently, as we all know, is the change in workflows and work styles with COVID. This has made some interesting conversations happen on this project, especially involved with how we treat the kits. Two of the things that we've kind of realized is housing these cameras centrally in WNYLRC is not feasible for the scaling of this project, and also we have to look at allowing people to use their own devices to contribute to this. So that's made us think about how we can accommodate images of panorama views on phones instead of using the Ryko 360 cameras that we have available. And luckily we've been able to test those, and we can get those panoramas to work with the like kind of filling the blank space that comes from that, and they do work. But that's changed our metadata. Also, we're trying to look at ways that we can help WNYLRC institution members find funding to get their own cameras and come to us with projects that they have and let us work with them to help them achieve them and get them into the repository so we have more content. We're also trying to tackle the true capabilities of Archipelago in this repository. There's the potential to add audio to these images, and maybe in the far future we can start hosting 360 video going forward. But at this point, we're really happy with the way that this site has developed in its beta phase, and we're really excited to let more people interact with it and give us feedback. And we think there's potential to make it something truly unique and special in the library community. So at this point, I think we're all happy to turn it over to you, the viewers, and answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I'm just going to turn back on your cameras. So.
All right.
Awesome. We do have a few questions, so I'm just going to jump right in. So our first question is the camera kit readily available via traditional vendors, or is this a special order?
It's a special order. It's just something that you can get from lots of different places. So I guess it's available from traditional vendors that libraries would have contact with, but you know, Amazon, those things also work.
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, we curated a kit specifically for the people that we wanted to use it, but anybody can build their own kit. We just at this point, I think we're transitioning from like having the kits to recommending viable options that help you with capturing 360 images. Even at the beginning of this project, we were working on kind of creating guides that would help you with actually capturing the images, how to get the best pictures. So it's kind of in that spirit that we're trying to transition a little bit. But I know when Joe and Ken, they presented on this at SUNY they talked about there was some availability issues with cameras and view headsets due to the COVID reality that we live in. So I don't know specifically what the availability is at this point, but it might be more difficult than maybe at the beginning of the year to link get these cameras.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. Our next question is, have you sort of adding the still existing Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Buffalo?
So the Darwin Martin house, I'm guessing?
I believe.
Yeah, I think that would be done on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we've reached out to them.
Yeah, the Wright Foundation is very, not just in Buffalo, but everywhere that there's Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, they're very, I don't want to say closed, but you know, they have very high requirements and expectations, I think, for photography of all kinds for the structures.
Makes sense. Do you charge the commercial entities for the use of the camera?
At this point, we only allow WNYLRC member institutions to have access to these devices. We're trying to figure out specifically how we're going to work with commercial institutions. So far, it's been, we've had connections with people who are at these sites like Shays Performing Arts Center or something like that. We go ourselves, take the images, and then we let them know that we're doing it. But that's a consideration going forward, how we're going to deal with that. But because we're trying to distribute where people have their own devices and we're not giving out a kit, we're trying to figure out how we can accommodate people outside of WNYLRC going forward. But it hasn't scaled to that level yet, so we're more in the like guess it or like hypothesizing stage.
Makes sense. Are you able to overlay narration on the panoramas?
You can add audio content as a hotspot if that's what you mean, or enrichment content. So yes, definitely.
Perfect. So you mentioned this is in beta. So what is the vision for the final product, and how will people access it and search contents?
I can give a general idea. I mean, I think the nature of this project has always been to create this repository that anybody can use for images that are specifically guided towards AR and VR experiences. So we're trying to make it so anybody can access it, and we're trying to, right now we're controlling who can contribute to it, but based on how it scales, we want this to become a educational resource that not only WNYLRC can have these curated, very great educational tools pre-built, but allow any educator, any researcher, anyone the ability to create these incredible panorama tours. We'd like to see if it's feasible getting 360 video in there, maybe if the infrastructure can sustain it, because the storage becomes much bigger and the ability to stream that content becomes a question. But we really want it to just be a one-stop like VR educational resource tool that not only just looks at the historic nature of the area, but also just has these creative uses of VR and AR imagery. And so it's like vague right now, but the goal is there. But right now we're just trying to see how people use it before we kind of force people into a certain channel.
No, that makes sense.
I think we're still in the process of kind of balancing what the responsibility is going to be for the user and contributor and the administration of the website. So as Reed said, we're still just trying to figure out how people are going to interact with it and how they're going to use it. I think the overall goal is to be as open with it as possible, but to keep it as realistic as possible as well.
And I do want to mention that ESIE.space is live, so anybody can go in there and look at it. So it's a beta, but it's an open beta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of already had a soft public launch, and then the project members are sharing it through our contacts and networks and things, but no grand announcements just yet.
Right. So you might have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's our last question. So you said that there's public access, but is it only the Western New York Library Resources Council members can access, or are you able to then build a collection outside of Western New York?
So I'll try and I guess I'll clarify kind of where we are right now. So anybody who goes to the site has the ability to view any images in the repository and also download them for their own use. Currently, we're restricting contributions to the site, so people adding images to the site to WNYLRC member institution individuals, and that's more just to make sure, based on how small our task force is, we can handle the ingest and make sure that the content isn't coming in that might be problematic before we can actually get to the curation of it. But as this project develops, we're going to hopefully extend this out, and we would like to see kind of a small growth from WNYLRC to the region, to more regions, to maybe the entire state, and then developing from there, but just taking it a step at a time, seeing who's interested and who wants to help build this out.
Mm-hmm. Right. Going along with what Reed just said, there is just a little bit of content generated from the New York City region. There was a photographer who became affiliated through Metro, who ended up contributing some content already. So there's that. So definitely the long-term plan is expansion, but to actually sign up as a member right now, or a contributor or someone, the requirement is for WNYLRC membership, but stay tuned.
Perfect. Well, those are all the questions that we have. So this concludes the NYLA 2020 on-demand program, Creating Immersive Experiences with ESIE and Archipelago. We hope to continue to take advantage of all the on-demand and live programs that NYLA 2020 annual virtual conference has to offer. Thank you so much for helping us make this the best virtual conference ever. Thank you all so much.